Soos genoem gesels ek vanoggend met professor Tomlinson en hy is van die Universiteit Stellenbosch en ons praat 'n bietjie Wêreldbevolkingsdag en wat dit alles kan behels, maar ook klimaatsverandering. Professor, welcome to GROOTplaas. It's such an honor to speak to you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I love that we're celebrating this day together. When we look at World Population Day, please put that into context for me. Why is today celebrated?
Well, it started many decades ago, and it was started by the United Nations as a way of thinking about population growth and thinking about all the issues that go together with population across the world, and it's obviously changed across time. So each year has a particular theme,
yeah.
And it may be related to children, or it may be related to sexual and reproductive health, or and that they have a theme every day. And last year, in fact, earlier this year was a very particular time in population growth because the world hit the 8 billion mark for the first time. Yep.
When we look at the population growing, obviously we are here focusing on agriculture and, nature. And so what does that direct impact look like with the population growing and the impact it has on our beautiful earth we are living in?
Sure. So we could spend days talking about this because it's a complicated issue. There've been books, for example, there was a famous book published many years ago now about how the world could only sustain 5 billion people. Advances in agriculture, advances in fertilizer, have made that worry, that concern kind of fade away. But there's no question that as populations grow, we push outwards. We push as cities grow. We push into areas of that were previously forests, maybe previously jungles, and essentially and there are many consequences for that. And we'll speak about climate change. But one of the consequences, of course, is that we then come into contact with animals that we may not have previously come into contact with. And many of the pandemics that the world has experienced, over the last of the last centuries, in fact, have been, because of that contact with animals that we previously weren't in contact with.
And I think if you talk about the impact it has, let's focus on climate change. I mean, what is the biggest factor that plays a role in climate change when it comes to the population growing, and why is that so?
Well, again, we could talk for days on this issue, but the way in which it impacts is at every different level. So to use one example, what's sometimes referred to as the Earth's lung is the Amazon rainforest. That is increasingly, as many of your viewers will know, is increasingly being cleared to grow various crops for cattle. So one of the crops that it grows that is cleared to grow is soya. We think of soya as humans often as a food in vegetarian meals, perhaps,
yes,
but in fact
true.
most of the soya, in fact, is actually grown for the consumption of the animals that we eat, ironically. And what happens is that soya, for example, is maybe grown in Brazil, but it will then be shipped to, for example, Thailand to be processed. It will then be shipped from Thailand to another part of the world to feed chickens, for example, or cattle. Each step in that process has climate consequences. It has fossil fuel consequences. The ships need massive amounts of fossil fuels to operate. So each step of the way, from both the clearing of the forest and the literally the lung of, not literally, but the metaphoric lung of our world is then being cleared, and each step then makes the situation worse.
Then I think from an academic perspective, what is the alternative? Are we as a population going in the right direction just in order to you know, protect this earth of ours? Because there's some things that need to happen, but what would your opinion be? Are we going in the right direction?
I mean, the short answer is no. There are pockets where we're going in the right direction, of course. You know, there are many countries in the world, like China, for example, is making massive strides in terms of using wind power, using solar power to power its economy. But in many parts of the world, in fact, recently, you know, I think it was BP, I think the British oil company that stepped back from some of its climate pledges, mostly, I think, because the American equivalent oil companies didn't make any pledges. And so they just increasing production, reaping massive, massive profits, some of which then go into lobbying to make fossil fuels less likely to be controlled and limited, you know. And so, and again, the situation is very complex. In a way, you've got rich countries who have become rich on the use of fossil fuels, who are now saying to Africa and other countries, no, you must stop using that and go to alternatives. And yet, in fact, they became rich on the back of fossil fuels, and now they're asking other poorer countries to tighten their belts, to do things differently. And I think there's a certain contradiction that is going to need to be resolved in there. But the short answer to your question is, we're not really moving in. And if we are, and I could be, someone could push back and say we are moving in the right direction. But even if we are, at the very least, we're not doing it fast enough.
But Professor, isn't it, when we look at climate change, and I really want to put, when we take farming worldwide actually into account, isn't it just the dog chasing its own tail, in the sense of we're going in circles? How does the ideal alternative picture look like like I say, when you take farming into account?
Sure. Look, I mean, the most basic truth of any society is that people need to eat. That's not an issue. So farming is key. It's central. I think somebody once said, if you want to cause a revolution, you know, stop people eating for a week and you'll have a revolution. It's one of the quickest ways. So,
yeah, that's true.
So farming has to be part of the solution. The problem is that the way in which things have developed to some extent, and I know that I'm going to get like a lot of pushback for this, but it's the current way in which so much, and increasingly so much of the world is eating, for example, more and more beef. That is not sustainable. We have to find alternatives. It's not sustainable in terms of what's required, you know, in terms of climate breakdown. And again, we're now asking people, rich countries who've been eating meat and everything for years, and now all of a sudden, where the rest of the world starts getting a bit more wealthy, we have to stop them eating meat as well. There's somewhat of a problem there. And I agree with that, but the reality is that it's not sustainable at the current levels, and if that increases, it gets less sustainable. So unless there's some miracle in terms of how we get rid of the carbon, some kind of technological fix, which some people do believe in, we have to think differently about what we farm, how we farm it. And by the way, just to say, this is from a public health researcher, not from a farmer who knows anything about farming.
No, absolutely. But what I love about this discussion is the fact that if we take population health into account, and I know that's also something that interests you a lot, population health, and there I want to say food production, farmers producing food, plays a big role. Is that the population health you are focusing on? Can you maybe tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I try to understand all of these different factors. The idea that any one factor is the ultimate factor in child development, for example, or in, you know, it is wrong. There are any number of factors. You know, a young child today that is living, for example, in Delhi, where the air pollution is incredibly bad. That has implications, huge implications for their lung health. Children, for example, aren't able to young children aren't able to regulate their temperature as well as adults can. They're liable to not be able to control how much air they take in the way that an adult can. So they're incredibly vulnerable to that. The impacts of that makes them more sickly, more likely to get ill. As they develop, the more time they spend getting ill, being in a hospital, for example, the less likely they are to be able to concentrate fully at school. The more they don't concentrate fully at school, the more likely they are to then start struggling, either start getting into trouble or withdraw from school because they're simply not coping. And when children withdraw from school, that has huge implications for populations, for population health.
Yes.
A child, particularly a boy who withdraws from school earlier and doesn't continue, is more likely to get involved with substances, is more likely to get involved in gangs, for example, and criminal behavior. Now, I'm not saying that breathing some pollution early on is causing criminal behavior. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that as people develop in contexts of adversity, where there are a whole lot of things that are likely to get worse. We know, we can look around our world with the amount of migrants we have globally, the humanitarian crises of people on the move. That is not good for the migrants. It's not good for the countries in which they were in. And we can see what's happening in terms of political sort of fragmentation and extremism as there's more and more migrants. Nobody wins in these scenarios. And so we have to see it as a bit like seeing it as the earth, as this holistic, there's this big kind of like planet that we desperately need to look after for our own survival. And we're doing an incredibly bad job at looking after that environment. And the implications of that are ultimately, we should be worried, but ultimately, in the worst case scenario, the earth will probably be fine. And this sounds like a terrible thing to say. But if there were no humans on the world, in the earth tomorrow, because we really messed it up so badly, is the earth would maybe take 1 million years to repair itself, but you know what, it would. But we'd be gone. We wouldn't have a home. And so we have to look after the earth, the animals on it, the biodiversity, and each other. And if we don't, all of us are in trouble.
We've got around 1.5 minutes left. I just want to hear from you practical tips for people who think, oh, you know, it's such a big problem. Where do I even start? And I firmly believe you. How do you eat an elephant? You know, first bite. You know, you take the first bite and then bite by bite. So the thing is, what are some practical tips from your side, just to start caring for our earth today?
Yeah, I mean, so much is, for example, is the first step is becoming knowledgeable and aware. There is so much misinformation around it. Is right now, as I'm talking, there will be people saying, yes, but climate change is a myth. It's been invented by scientists or the CIA. There's so many conspiracy theories. So get yourself aware of the facts of actually what's happening. And that is a really good start. Become an advocate at the smallest level. You know, if every person on every street in South Africa started thinking about what they could do to use less fossil fuel, to carpool if possible, to just even think about how we could all, you know, and if every street was doing that, that would be massive. So I agree with you entirely. Is if you think about, I mean, it's the ultimate big issue. You know, thinking about how to change a government or a political system is hard sometimes. How to change the nature of the Earth's breathing mechanism is next to impossible for most people to conceive of. And the only option, you're right, is everybody taking their own first bite. You know,
exactly, and playing your part.
And that's the start. That's, you know, and becoming advocates and people who push politicians. We have a number of politicians right now who are in the pockets of big oil. We need to be advocates to push back against them and say, this is not okay.
Prof,
and we can do that.
Sorry, I unfortunately have to. Yeah, we're at the end of the program, but I hear you, and I wish we had more time, and we're definitely going to speak again. Thank you for your time and your passion, and have a good day.
Thanks. You too. Thank you.
Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. Ek en jy sien mekaar môreoggend weer. Ek hoop jy het 'n lekker dag. Gaan vier ons Wêreldbevolkingsdag. Totsiens.